Today, in the second part of our 4-part mini-series on change management, we're looking at unspoken fears and behavioral levers that actually determine if your AI rollout survives the real world. Hi, I'm Courtney Baker. This is AI Know-How from KnownWell, helping you reimagine your business in the AI era. As always, I'm joined by KnownWell CEO DeWolf, Chief Product and Technology Officer Mohan Rao, and Nordlight CEO Pete Buer. We also have part 2 of Pete Buer's conversation with Tom Davenport on the intersection of data, analytics, AI, and change management. But first, Pete Buer joins us to break down some of the latest in AI news. Hey, Pete, how are you?
I'm good, Courtney. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, Pete, we have some new data from Gallup this week on AI adoption in the workplace. I mean, these just keep coming, and I think they're going to keep coming for a while. The headline says usage is rising, but when I look at the actual numbers, I was a little surprised. AI usage seems lower than the hype would suggest. What is your read on this?
Well, first, getting into the numbers to understand what it is that Gallup has observed, 45% of employees now use AI at least a few times a year. 23%, 1 in 4, are using it a few times a week, but only 10% are using it daily. As you'd expect, the numbers vary by sector. So getting inside of those averages, tech and finance numbers are a great deal higher, manufacturing and retail numbers are a great deal lower. Even so, it doesn't seem like an awful lot of the workforce is doing much more than using AI as a novelty or a once in a while helper. It's not fundamentally a core part of their job. There were some other interesting call outs in the data as well, and I cherry picked a couple of those. 23% of employees generally have no idea if their company is using AI or not. And inside of that number, turns out leaders are far more in the know than the masses, suggesting that some of the problem, if we characterize it that way, is that the word hasn't gotten down from the top and that adoption and change management practices either haven't progressed sufficiently just yet or maybe are failing. Another helpful question in the data, when people do use AI, however infrequently, what are they using it for? The top answers are consolidating information, generating ideas, and learning something new. All the advanced cases have extremely low scores, as you would imagine, based on what we've discussed so far. So the pessimistic stance on all this would be that across the broader workforce, we're using AI really infrequently, and mostly just as a search tool or maybe a fancy Clippy, summarizing emails, brainstorming meeting titles. But the optimist in me remembers that change is slow and hard, and the fact that nearly half the workforce has touched this tool in just the 2 years it's been available is frankly historic.
Pete, this is probably for most people listening, I would think probably kind of shocking that this is where we are. Probably naive to think that it would be faster than this, but I'm just guessing that most people listening to this podcast on AI
Right.
probably using AI at a
Right.
pretty decent clip. I think it's so helpful, though, to reframe this into reality because even if you personally are using it a lot, there are people on your team that aren't leveraging it yet. And so how do you continue? I know there's big efforts in the last couple of years to bring people up. That job obviously has not ended. If anything, it's probably just progressed, and it's providing a really big gap. And so if we don't get those people on board quickly, it's just going to continue to widen. Pete, really great stuff. Thank you as always. Yes.
You, Courtney.
We often hear that people are afraid of AI, but is that really true? Or are they actually afraid of being devalued? I sat down with David and Mohan recently to discuss why Psychological safety has to precede AI literacy. David, Mohan, this is the second episode in our mini-series on AI change management. Last episode, we laid out the strategic playbook, if you will, what leaders need to do in terms of workflow design and modeling learning publicly. We talked about getting the mechanics of change right. But here is the consistent and often frustrating reality. Even when the strategy is crystal clear and the technology works exactly as intended, AI change can still stall out,
Mhm.
which, yeah, that's frustrating. A lot of times, this is not a technology problem. It is a people problem and a trust problem. It comes down to, some of the things we talked early in the last episode about, of those like unspoken fears, about relevance, about resistance that gets treated like an obstruction or failure to just acknowledge the loss of old skills. So today we're facing it head on and zooming in on the human side of the behavioral and cultural levers that leaders must pull to truly earn trust and turn employee resistance into useful information. So, David, can you kick us off today? What are the most critical steps leaders should take to cultivate the kind of organizational trust that makes AI adoption at scale possible?
I think a lot of this, as you said, is human. It's human nature, and it's leadership of how do you lead people through change. But I do think there are some things that are uniquely oriented to AI and the fear that it's stirring up, right? When you think about change management, a lot of times it's about removing fear. And so I would just start with a few principles. You alluded to a couple of these. I think one of the things for leaders to grasp is that first and foremost, that when we do experience resistance, pushback about adopting AI, that's an information signal for you. It's not necessarily obstruction. Don't just jump to assuming the worst case scenario, right? It may be an information signal that can allow you to adopt change the way that you are rolling out AI in your organization or the way a solution is leveraging it, et cetera, et cetera. So treat it as information, not obstruction, would be the first thing that I would say. Number two is I would go back to this concept of fear
Mhm.
and let's get to the root of the fear. People aren't necessarily afraid. I think there are very few people, put it this way, that are afraid of the technology itself, right? I think what people are actually afraid of is being devalued.
Hmm.
Right? They're afraid of this push that all of a sudden technology is more important than me. What's going to happen to my job? What's going to happen to my role? What's going to happen to the skill set that I have? Like, am I devalued to a point where, as a human being, I don't matter anymore in this organization or even in the world? Right? There's very few people I think that are actually thinking about daily and reacting to, oh my gosh, the extinction of the human race. Right? That's not the fear that exists in a business setting. It's the fear of being devalued, and that's a very real thing. Go back to Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like that sense of self confidence and self preservation is very real. I think as part of that, one of the things that we have to do as leaders is to acknowledge loss. All right. We have to acknowledge that there will be workflows that change, that there will be some skills that matter more than others in the coming ages, right? And like the role of a research analyst may not be the same. And there are certain things there that probably are going away. And we've got to be able to acknowledge that and not just try to bat them all away and tell people that they're wrong because people are smarter than that, right? People know, right? Let's not lie to them. It's like, we don't know what the future is going to look like, but we do know there will be loss. Let's figure out together how we get to the other side of that.
Mhm.
And then the last thing I would say is whenever you talk about fear and overcoming fear, I think you have to talk about trust. And how do you build trust? Trust is something that you can't just build through reassurance, right? I tell my kids all the time, right? Trust takes somebody, I have to give my kids trust for them to prove that they are trustworthy, right? And so it's this thing that has to be gifted, but then it has to be delivered upon.
Hmm.
And so it's that reassurance that occurs through consistency and delivering on what we say. And so it's this action and this follow through that really, really matters. So stop trying to build trust by just getting up and talking, and start to build trust in the day-to-day actions and the consistency on delivering what you say. And I think if leaders can embrace those things, right? Treating resistance as a signal, not an obstruction, really pushing into the fear and understanding that people are afraid of being devalued, right? Then really looking at acknowledging loss and building trust. Those four things I think can really help with this human aspect.
Yeah. You know what it reminds me of? We're just like coming off the Christmas season in my household. If we get a movie that we like, we have to watch it 6 million times. And so in my household, Elf has basically been on a loop in this household. But do you two remember the scene in Elf where he has to go down and work in the mailroom at
I do remember that
the
scene.
Empire State Building? And I just had a moment where I was like, guys, remember that? There used to be mail rooms that would distribute the mail, through the memo system in all of
Manila
those.
envelopes and
Yeah,
striking
yeah, yeah.
through like the
Yes.
interoffice memo. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, where you would scratch
Uh,
out somebody's name and put the next name down
that's
there.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and like everybody would look at that today and be like, yeah, like obviously it was so antiquated. We don't need that. But for the human whose job it was to run that post office, that is a real loss when that happened. And I think it's really easy for us, especially the further we get from the connection with the individual who really does care about that skill that is going away, that loss. And I just feel like that's really wise, David, that advice of acknowledging it, being connected to it, actually not leaning out from the loss, but leaning into it.
Mhm.
Just feels like a really valuable reminder in this season when we want to be like, just use it. Like it's not that hard.
Totally.
Okay, so Mohan, now that we're all in our feels about the people in the mailroom, can you give us some just like practical steps on building trust?
I think we've got some older frames that we need to let go here, right? So when you hear about user adoption not going well within AI systems, you think that people are change resistant and they don't want to change. Change is hard and so on and so forth. But there's an additional layer here. They distrust it when the uncertainty is hidden from them, right? And then executives don't talk about, they're not transparent about uncertainty, but they have this polished reassurance of how things should be and treat it like a regular system, regular SaaS that we've used for a long time. So it's really about the uncertainty is a feature, but hiding that uncertainty breaks trust,
Hmm.
right? That's the point of AI. The second I would say is you got to get teams involved as part of human in the loop system, right? So when you can get people in and they understand how it works, how it can help them, as opposed to just kind of acting like it's any other product, any other system, that's when it breaks. They've got to be part of the human in the loop system for most B2B applications out there. And the third thing that I'll say is this psychological safety around judgment comes way before AI literacy, right?
Mm,
They need to be told and evangelized that they can disagree with AI,
Mhm.
they can kind of express their feeling that the AI system is wrong, and not always be kind of comparing to it's me versus them, me versus the AI system. It is just have a rational conversation among the humans to say what seems to be working, what doesn't work, But this kind of safety enables judgment, right? That is the key point with AI systems. And it's really important that leaders double down on this. The AI does not fail because people resist. It fails when the leaders don't create the conditions where people feel safe enough to exercise judgment, right? That's the point of this and how you operationalize it.
So good. And it probably goes without saying, hey, everybody, if you have a toxic culture, good luck in this next era.
Well, and I'll take that one further. We've talked a lot on this podcast about figuring out what is truly human, which is what is not. And what I hear Mohan talking about is acknowledging what is truly human, right? Wisdom. Right, having that judgment to make a prudential decision based on the reality, not just based on the knowledge of the facts, but to actually apply that to a human situation is uniquely human. And we need to honor the human being. And so if you want to not devalue somebody, right, how do you do that? Creating this culture where we're not just turning humans into robots that follow what the machines say, but we actually elevate the human and say, the reason we're doing this is so that you can exercise more wisdom, so you can make better and more decisions, and to have that autonomy. And we're going to leverage the machine to do what it's great at, which is just collect information and synthesize it for you, right? That's empowering. That creates value, and that acknowledges the dignity of the human person versus the machinery of the AI.
That's really well said. It's all about creating that safety around human judgment is the key here. Well said, David.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think when we don't do that, we unintentionally just erode any trust that we've built. We start over again. David, Mohan, I think this is such an interesting conversation. Some really rich things here. Thank you both, as always.
Thanks,
I did
thanks,
it
Mohan.
backwards.
Courtney.
I did it backwards. I don't know. You know, one thing that makes change management easier? Having intelligence that actually solves a problem that you need to act on. That's what KnownWell provides for professional services leaders looking to drive net revenue retention and client satisfaction. Our 30-day trial lets you see exactly how KnownWell supports your growth and retention targets. You can get started at knownwell.com/30 days today for a free trial. No credit card, no commitment, just the commercial intelligence you need to drive your business forward. If you listened to last week's interview with Tom Davenport, you know he needs no introduction. Tom is the co-author of 25 books and more than 300 articles that help organizations transform their business practices in the digital era. Here's part 2 of his conversation with Pete Buer.
You've watched transformations across time, and you've probably seen a great mix of best practice and failure. Let's talk about failure. When things go wrong in this space of AI-driven transformation, are you seeing patterns in why they fail?
Well, the biggest domain of failure, I think, is lack of commitment to putting these systems into production. The pilotitis, as it's been described, is really quite an endemic disease, and you don't get economic value out of AI if you don't move beyond pilots. And many companies just have not put in a structure process that would, assuming a pilot works out, provides value, works technically, and so on, to move it to the next stage and eventually get it into production deployment. So that is the single biggest problem, I would say. Another is not thinking carefully about what this does for the enterprise rather than the individual. I mean, generative AI was so easy to use that a number of organizations thought, okay, we'll just provide Copilot for everybody and they'll figure out some way that it adds value to their work. Unfortunately, I think that has not turned out very well for most organizations. You no doubt you get some incremental productivity gains, but Um, nobody seems to know what employees are doing with that freed up time. One company that I worked with actually concluded that they saved 17 million minutes. I can't remember whether that was a year or in aggregate, but I said, "What are they doing with all those freed up minutes?" We don't know. We're sure it's something good. Um, so I think moving away from those individual level approaches toward enterprise level ones to say, what are some projects that are really going to move the needle in particular generative AI. That was less of a problem with analytical AI, and letting people certainly continue to experiment at the individual level, maybe figuring out a way to advance individual level use cases to more enterprise ones if they appear very promising. One company I work with is doing a kind of a Shark Tank like effort
Nice.
to decide what to fund at the enterprise level. But I think we've made a mistake in assuming because these things are so easy to use by individuals, we should just turn everybody loose and say, you know, have fun and be productive.
It does seem like there are phases to um, incorporation of the technology, doesn't it? Because early days, we talked to as we were, building our business, we talked to a lot of CEOs about the degree to which the C-suite was using, familiar with, had acumen regarding generative AI, and there wasn't a ton, and so CEOs, boards were pushing CEOs, CEOs were pushing their team to just go out and play with it and experiment, and like it was sort of the thousand flowers blooming stage. But you do get to a place where okay, like I think we get it now, and it's chaos rather than organized energy, and so let's start driving for impact on the business by sizing where is impact going to come from, what do we tackle in what order, and so forth. Is are companies being scientific about that, being like strong process behind it?
I'm starting to. I wrote an article a few weeks ago with a couple of Stanford people in Harvard Business Review on, what does it mean to do enterprise level projects? And we had a number of examples of companies. Johnson and Johnson was one where they said we had 900 individual level use cases we were sort of tracking. We're going to switch to about 9 enterprise level ones. There was another article that I liked in Harvard Business Review that I did not write about the fact that there are too many pilots and with generative AI, and they use the language of shifting from broad and shallow implementation to narrow and deep. And I like that terminology, but I think organizations really need to. There was early on this idea that you'd have a sort of portfolio of activities, and some would advance and some wouldn't, but not that many companies ended up developing it. But I think it's still necessary and slowly catching on, I would say.
Yeah. And so when a company's in this sort of advanced phase, going from 900 experiments to 9 initiatives, no doubt they're cross-functional and you need the power of the organization behind them. I want to go back to a comment that you made earlier about how failure often happens between the pilots and scaling. What goes wrong when you don't get those 9 critical pilots to a place where they're scaling and implemented? How does that come off the rails?
Well, AI is fueled by data, so data is often a bugaboo in getting to successful broad implementation. Generative AI, we're not going to get a whole lot of value if we're using only open AI, or I started to say open anthropic um, data. We need to put as much of our own important data into these systems if we're going to be successful. And there's a pretty well publicized way to do that with this RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. But in order to do that, you have to have pretty high quality unstructured data. And most organizations have not been really managing their unstructured data well over the past several decades. We tried that with knowledge management. Most organizations backed away. Professional services firms are probably better off in some cases because many of them stuck with knowledge management, and they sort of where it went awry was not really having human curation to say, okay, of 22 different proposals that we have in SharePoint for implementing CRM in the utility industry, which of these is the best? Which ones ought to go into our RAG system? Generative AI is not going to tell you which is the best. You probably also need some data about which ones were most successful in yielding, big and profitable projects. And that is also something typically that humans have to get engaged in looking at. So I think data is one big issue. There is also the upskilling issue and the failure of organizations to really let people know what you need to do to use these systems successfully on a day-to-day basis. That typically means changing day-to-day behaviors and getting people to look at the outputs of at least of generative AI systems and see, does it make any sense? And there's some estimates that 80% of generative AI output is never looked at by a human before it goes out into the world, and that's bad news.
We could have a whole nother program about that one. That scares me.
Me too. The word work slop comes to mind.
Right,
Um,
right.
And I don't know if you noticed, but slop was the Economist's word of the year. So it's kind of depressing that that's the word of the year. But
Well, that is terrific insight and advice for the folks listening, leaders looking to make sense of the work to get pilots become real. Ironically, it's not the technology; it's the data and the content that's going in, and the humans working around it as usual.
just on that issue, every year I work with this guy, Randy Bean, on a survey of data leaders in large organizations and data and AI leaders. And um, it, this year, Randy always asks us, he designs the questions. He asks, what's keeping you from becoming a data-driven organization? Is it technology or is it human issues, culture, organization, skills, etc.? And this year, it's always, really high on the human side versus
Right.
technology. This year was 93% said it was human related issues. Yet most organizations are spending a lot more on technology than they are on addressing the human side.
100%. Tom, I realize we're at time. I could go forever. This has been a delight, and we're honored to have had you on the program.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks as always for listening and watching. Don't forget to give us a rating on your podcast player of choice. I said this last week. I'll say it again this week. If you are on a team and you're rolling out AI initiatives, this is a great series to send to anyone that you know is thinking about AI initiatives. So send them last week's episode, send them this week's episode. At the end of every episode, we like to ask one of our AI friends to weigh in on the topic at hand. So, hey, Claude, today we're talking about the human side of AI change. What's key to driving AI adoption in traditional change management?
The key is getting people hands-on practice and showing real benefits, plus having leadership actually use it themselves. You need to address job security concerns, not just push the tech from the top down.
And now, you're in the know. Thanks as always for listening and watching. We'll see you next week with more AI applications, discussions, and an interview with best-selling author Scott D. Anthony that I promise you will not want to miss.
Hey, if you made it this far in the episode, first of all, thank you. And second, we know that AI is changing all the time, and so we've got you covered. Here is another great episode for you to watch to stay in the loop on what's happening in AI and business. And second of all, we'd love for you to subscribe. You can do that right here. I've always wanted to do that, by the way. So do that now. That would be great.